If you don't already know it, resentment is what makes the world go round. It isn't money, as the song goes. It's resentment. And in this podcast I'm going to try and convey largely what Nietzsche thought about the whole thing, although you could have put this together from Spinoza's work as well. And in fact, Nietzsche considered that Spinoza was his only real predecessor. He considered Schopenhauer to be one of his teachers, but that's not the same thing. He dismissed a lot of Schopenhauer's work, but he considered his messages were very similar to those of Spinoza. Anyway, to get onto this resentment thing, you can see here a picture of the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, as you'll see later, was the result of resentment. You see the priest there in the lower right corner. Some guy having his feet burned or something. And the priest is full of resentment. What kind of resentment? Well, as I say, we'll treat that later. The place we need to start is just with an appreciation that every creature, you, I, every animal you see, everything you see, is hell-bent on expressing and gaining as much power as it can. Well, what kind of power? Well, in the human domain it's quite varied. Money, fame, sexual conquests, authority, domination over others, all those kind of things. These days it tends to be money quite a lot, because money seems to be the contemporary expression of power. More than position, really. If somebody's a multi-billionaire, all of a sudden everybody's swooning and saying, "Oh, wow." They don't consider that the guy's probably just a freak and being very lucky. But anyway, that's another story. So everything wants to maximize its power. Now, what happens when you can't maximize your power? So let's go to a typical environment, the workplace. Say you are just an underling in a normal department in some kind of business, and you have bosses above you, and your bosses are telling you day in, day out what to do. Maybe your bosses are total bastards, and they're putting pressure on you, setting impossible deadlines, just being generally unpleasant. What's going to happen? Well, your bosses are enjoying this expression of power, but you are going to end up resenting. That's the way the whole mechanism works. Nietzsche called this need to express power the will to power. And he says quite correctly that some people, creatures, will happily destroy themselves in the attempt to express this power. So you see people, for example, on very dangerous extreme sports. To get that power, to get that rush, they're quite happy to risk possibly killing themselves. So this expression of power is everything. If you can't express the power, then you start resenting. And resentment is like a poison. It starts to create slyness, devious behavior, planning, scheming. See, the people who've got power don't need to do all that stuff. Why would they need to do all this scheming and planning and all the rest of it? Well, clearly they don't. They've got what they want. The people who haven't got what they want, you possibly as a low-ranking employee in an organization, maybe you're going to nick some stuff out of the stationery cabinet. Maybe you're going to take sick days off because you resent the fact that you are employed on a low salary and your working conditions are shit. And so you're going to get your own back in whatever way you can. So this is where resentment and breeds deviousness, cunning, all those kind of things. So remember that the powerful generally fairly straightforward. They can afford to be straightforward. The resentful ones, the ones who are oppressed in some way, are the ones who are lacking in power. They cannot express their power, so they become resentful and they become devious and cunning. Now, typical examples in life: glamorous females. Other women will resent them. The most successful men in the bar or in a club or whatever, they may well be resented by other men. Affluent people resent the bankers. Why? Well, the bankers are twice blessed, If they make their bets and win, they reap a very big reward. If they make their bets and lose, they get the taxpayer to pay for their losses. And people resent that. These bankers are in positions of power. Whereas your average person slaves away all their life to make what one of these bankers might make in a year, or maybe even less than that. And your affluent neighbours, you will resent them because you want that nice big new luxury sedan that your neighbour's got. And you can't because you haven't got the power, the financial power to do it. So resentment is pushing the world around. It motivates people. Resentment is not just a passive response. In Spinoza's language, it would be called envy. But resentment's a bigger thing. We tend to envy people who are successful and to take pleasure in their downfall if they have some bad luck. But this whole mechanism drives something much, much more fundamental, and that is our moral codes. So what happens to these people who are, let's say you're in an office environment, your bosses are extremely affluent and wealthy, driving nice big cars and jetting away on holidays and so on, and you are there slaving away, and what happens is you start to get kind of creative. Oh, it's wrong for people to be that wealthy. Oh, it's wrong for people to enjoy themselves like that. So this is where Nietzsche is so correct in saying that resentment itself becomes a creative force. It starts to create a set of morals. Nietzsche highlighted the Christian and Judaic traditions as being a good example of this, because of course the Jews and the Christians, in the early days anyway, were under the rule of Rome, and the Jews had been under the rule of the Egyptians as well. These were oppressed people. They were resentful. And so they create a moral standard which is based around humility, chastity, charity, modesty, all those kind of things. The morals that resentful people would create, because that's the way they're having to behave. They're having to be modest. And so that behavior of theirs becomes, well, look at these people here. The wealthy ones or whatever, they're so careless with their money. Modesty, we are modest. The problem is that the ones who are in power become kind of complacent. Before you know it, this set of morals that I've just gone through, chastity, charity, modesty, humility, all those good things, they start to creep into the general consciousness, and they're seen as the way that people should behave. Now, it doesn't stop the powerful being the powerful. So, Henry VIII paid lip service to the church, although his life was wholly different. He certainly wasn't modest and chaste. But nonetheless, these morals that have come from resentment start to grow. Now, if you look at the world as it is today, we have a new set of morals being created. So, let's take your average person, to work their butt off to make ends meet. Not being able to do the things that they'd like to do. This is all the conditions that you need for resentment. So they start to resent people that don't have to do those things, that are not working their butts off all week. And this has been exploited to absolute perfection in the United States and the United Kingdom. Who are the immoral ones today? The immoral ones are the so-called lazy, the sick, the immigrants, because I know more about the UK than the US, but certainly in the UK, the immigrants, the general public perception is that immigrants are lazy and just sucking off the state. The figures show otherwise, that immigrants generally contribute quite a lot to the economy. But that doesn't matter, because all of these people in the United Kingdom who are working their life away very quickly have this resentment, and they need to have a set of morals that they create that comply with their mode of behavior today. So they're working hard. They have very little spare money, say. Maybe they can't do most of the things they want to do. And so all of a sudden, when when they see someone who's not behaving like that, then that becomes an offence, as far as they're concerned. It offends their sense of morality. So today you have a morality which is increasingly based around optimism. Well, you have to be optimistic, because the total shit that your life is today cannot be what it will be tomorrow, otherwise you'll just give up hope. So optimism is a new morality. So is industriousness. Why? Well, because all these people in the big ant's nest called the economy are having to work like crazy, and so anybody who's not industrious is breaking that moral code. They have to be mindless. Why? Because you have to be in a kind of mindless state to live like that. This is why we have, again in the United States and the United Kingdom, protests against experts. There's a very, very strong anti-intellectual campaign taking place, both in the US and the UK. Why? Well, because your average person now has no time for all of that. So it's seen as kind of unnecessary, as just laziness. Oh, they're just head wankers. They just stand around thinking all day. So we now have a new set of morals which is driven by resentment, industriousness, optimism, mindlessness, consumerism. Well, this is where you're going to get your pleasure now, by buying stuff in as far as you can. Anybody who's not into consumerism these days would be viewed with great suspicion. So the people who are kind of attempting to go off grid are despised. Why? Well, but they're not complying to this new moral code of industriousness and all the rest of it. So the immoral become the lazy, the sick, the pessimist, the intelligent, the person satisfied by simple things. These are the people who are now immoral. And God forbid, but if we go back in the way we behave, maybe these kinds of things you see on the pictures might not be all that rare. People having their feet burned, some guy pouring what looks like, I know they used to pour molten lead into people's throats. Maybe that's what he's doing. Somebody cutting somebody's arm off. This is what resentment breeds. And so resentment is not just a passive thing, it shapes the whole of our society. And of course in your personal life, you can look at what you resent. Do you resent those people driving around in big flash cars? Do you resent that person that's working opposite to you that's far more successful with the opposite sex? And remember, resentment comes from your inability to express your power. This is what we all are, little power-expressing machines. If we can't do that, we become resentful. So it's going to be interesting over the next 10, 20 years to see how far this new set of moral values, because nobody's really interested in you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't lie, and all those moral values that came from the Christian religion. Nobody's interested in that stuff anymore. In fact, the heads of state in a number of countries are well-known liars and cheats and all the rest of it. People applaud it almost. What people are really homing in on now are those who are not optimistic, those who are not industrious, those who are not mindless, those who are pessimists. To say you're a pessimist is to basically stick a big label on your forehead saying that you are a leper, to be totally avoided. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. And expect the new moral code, industriousness and all those things, to become more extreme as conditions on this planet become more difficult.